The reading from Emmett Fox asks that we read Matthew chapter 5, verses 33 to 37. So I'm going to read that first. Again, you have heard that it was said to them who were before you, that you shall not lie in your oaths, but entrust your oaths to the Lord. But I say to you, never swear, neither by heaven, because it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is a stool under his feet, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of a great king. Neither shall you swear by your own head, because you cannot create in it a single black or white hair. But let your words be yes, yes, and no, no. For anything which adds to these is a deception. What he says here again, you have heard that it hath been said by them of old time, thou shalt not forswear thyself, but shalt perform unto the Lord thine oaths. But let your communication be yea, yea, nay, nay, for whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil. Swear not at all is one of the cardinal points in the teaching of Jesus. It means briefly that you are not to mortgage your future conduct in advance, to seek to fix your conduct or your belief for tomorrow while it is yet today. Rather, you are constantly to keep yourself an open channel for the pouring out of the Holy Spirit into manifestation through you. Of course, Jesus does not mean that you are not to enter into ordinary business engagements, nor does he mean that the ordinary oath administered in a court of law is inadmissible. These things are matters of legal convenience. The Sermon on the Mount is a treatise on the spiritual life, for the spiritual life controls all the rest.
It's interesting that that should be the reading for the day. One of George Fox's key belief components is that your yea be yea and your nay be nay. That this is the simplicity of walking in the light. And it is also a way of treating all with equality, recognizing the equality of all. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. This is the day 5 of our, what I'm calling set of mini pilgrimages for self-reflection and renewal. To remind you, or if you've just tuned into this one, we're working off the Quaker Testimonies, the 6 Quaker Testimonies, or Words for Living, Guidance for Living. And the Quakers call them testimonies. It's concepts for how to live, how to act based on our faith, based on our beliefs, our walk with the divine. And they shouldn't be regarded as a fixed dogma, but rather a distillation of friends' faith in action over the centuries. The memory guide is the word spices. Simplicity, peace, integrity, community, equality, which is the one we'll be talking about today, and stewardship. So how do we define equality? And I want to be very specific here because there's equality and there's spiritual equality. And what I found when I was working on this was I kept slipping into the idea of just equality, but that is a fixed concept with very limited application in my view. Okay, so your skin is a different color, you're equal to me. You have a different car, but you're equal to me. Whereas spiritual equality is a much broader concept, and the two in some cases go hand in hand. So equality is treating everyone everywhere as equally precious to God, recognizing that everyone has gifts to share. Spiritual equality, we might put it this way: the divine sees no difference between spiritual walks or even how spiritually intense or advanced that we are. I want to look at how different faiths, different religions talk about equality, because I think it'll give some nuances that are worth your thinking about as you take time this week to reflect. Unity says, achieving higher consciousness is the entire point of our presence here as spiritual beings engaged in a human experience. We can't achieve a higher consciousness. We can't move higher in our ability to feel and express more of the infinite love that is God if we insist on staying locked in primitive beliefs. A Quaker writer from it, named Ed Townley says, "How I long for the day when we will collectively stop clinging fearfully to old outlawed interpretations of Bible scripture based on concepts of an angry, demanding, and punishing God, and embrace instead the infinitely loving, intimately expressing presence and power that Jesus Christ taught and demonstrated some 2,000 years ago." Now, think about that. He is presenting as, spiritual equality as an alternative to an angry, demanding, punishing God, and you're on God's side and everybody else isn't. He goes on to say, and if I said he's a Quaker writer, no, he's a unity writer. Today we see all beings, male and female alike, as unique expressions of the light and love of God. If we are to honor the level of consciousness to which Jesus Christ calls us, we must ensure that all our relationships, heterosexual, homosexual, familial friendships, are soundly based on a recognition of spiritual equality. No one is meant to be the inferior, submissive, or underperformer, or unbeliever. Every relationship, every intimacy is to be a loving, joyful union of two creative expressions of God. Now, from a, shall we say, more Christian source, the headline of this article, in a place called Truth Immutable, I don't know any of its background, spiritual equality is a critical part of the cross. The cross entrenches the principle of spiritual equality. When we do not honor this, we stand in rebellion and bring the ways of the world into the church. So consider that aspect, particularly in a time when there is so much upset and division and hatred and unaccepted going on. That is bringing the ways of the world into the church, which we will define as a loving, joyous, accepting God. And he talks about how the usual is in this world that there are those who are accorded more privileges, the wealthy being a good example. The invisible line that dictates that some are more important than others, are superior because they're more wealthy, as an example, or have higher social status. But the very real truth is that God sees no difference in his children. Spiritual equality is an integral part of his love and grace. He cannot and will not ever love any of his children, any of us, in other words, more than another. Spiritual equality is part of God's nature. So he then goes on to Matthew 5, where it says that God sends the rain and the sun to both the just and the unjust. And while this is dealing with natural things, he makes the point that this is the fundamental to the nature of God, that all men are equal, and God does not withhold the necessities of life within the natural world. And so in the natural world, it is having a privileged position is no guarantee that we're going to get more of the natural world, get more of God's love than someone who is, shall we say, less well positioned in an earthly sense. The mature believer who has followed Christ for many years is no more special than the brand new Christian struggling to adjust to their new citizenship. Now, this person's writing in a Christian perspective. I encourage you to think of it in the broader perspective that we in this church tend to adopt, where the divine is love and Christ represents the teachings. Think of Richard Rohr's Cosmic Christ as an example. And all of us are somewhere on the path to the citizenship, if you will, of perfect connection with divine love and ever more perfect representation in this world on behalf of divine love. So he goes on to make the point, blessings from God are available in equal measure to all. We may simply be at different places in our journey, and we will receive in different measure because that's what we're capable of. And those of you who are familiar with the lift on therapy that I do, you've seen perhaps in your own lives how it's our own beliefs that limit what God's able to give to us. So we may be internally saying, oh, God must not love me. I'm not experiencing this or that. But, you know, God allows us the freedom to limit our experiences to him. Now, the Baha'i, which is, we might say, an extension or an offshoot of the Muslims, though the Muslims would fiercely contest that. Here's a piece from a Baha'i text. Equality of the sexes is for Baha'is a spiritual and moral standard essential for the unification of the planet and the unfoldment of world order. And from Baha'u'llah, the founder, the world of humanity is possessed of two wings, the male and the female. So long as these two wings are not equivalent in strength, the bird will not fly. Until womanhood reaches the same degree as man, until she enjoys the same arena of activity, extraordinary attainment for humanity will not be realized. Humanity cannot wing its way to heights of real attainment. So here's another approach to equality, this time delineating male and female. When we are looking at equality, remember there's many equalities. The Peace Pilgrim herself talks about how every piece of this place that we dwell in is of God. And another writer says, Christ makes us one body and individuals who are connected to each other. And I'll extend that and say, Christ makes us one body, and that includes this earth and this universe that we dwell in. And this one goes on to say, every part gets its meaning from the body as a whole, not the other way around. And we're talking about the chosen people, those who have chosen to walk the spiritual walk. Each of us can find meaning and function as part of this body. We become together when we cannot be alone. There's no division, even though each of us may have a different calling, a different skill set, a different capability. We need to understand that we are a community walking in the Spirit, and thus all of us part of the equality, part of the spiritual existence that is shared among all of us. In that sense, we really cannot consider ourselves self-sustainable, because each of us is dependent on others walking around us and with us to help us move forward in our spiritual walk. Father Richard Rohr, whom I quote often, Jesuit priest, who often gets a Franciscan, I'm sorry, talks about letting go or self-emptying as the way of Jesus. He believes that all great spirituality is about letting go. And I suggest to you, true spiritual equality, to gain true spiritual equality, to live in it, to practice it, is to let go of earthly distinctions and understand, at our core, every one of us is a small piece of the greater divine. Each one of us is walking on, living in pieces of the divine. And it is all one, and we are all one with it. And that is spiritual equality. And from that must grow our relationship to the earth and to the others we encounter in this earth. And that is moving from spiritual equality to actions of, so shall we say, general equality. Then there's a quote by Dominican mystic Meister Eckhart: God is not found in the soul by adding anything, but by a process of subtraction. True spiritual wisdom reveals that less is more. Jesus taught this, and the holy ones always discover it in one way or another. And then Richard Rohr suggests we look at the Dalai Lama, Nelson Mandela, Dorothy Day, and so many generations of nuns, friars, monks, and other religious followers who've taken a vow of poverty. And I'm going to emphasize here, we tend to think, or at least I find myself tending to think, poverty in terms of the narrow, how many dollars do I have in my wallet? Think poverty in terms of willingness not to have anything other than that connection with our spirit within and the greater spirit without. And then a quote from Marshall Vian Summers: do not think that you can embrace the divine and become equal with all life if you cannot even establish a meaningful and working relationship of equalness with one another. So here's a call the other way. Until you can be comfortable with equalness among all, you are likely to have difficulty living in spiritual equality. So it goes, the flow goes both ways. And then sort of looking at it from the Eastern perspective, I found a very interesting commentary about Hinduism, about Krishna being the God of gods, as I understand it. A Krishna conscious person, one whose consciousness is focused upon Krishna, in other words, the Godhead, the perfect, becomes eligible to see Krishna everywhere. And because he sees Krishna everywhere, he sees within Krishna the true equality of all living beings. Let me say that part again, but I'm going to translate it into more Western words. And because he sees God everywhere, remember what I said about the Peace Pilgrim? He sees God, within God, the true equality of all living beings. So to walk in spiritual equality, live in spiritual equality, we need be willing not to even attempt to collect brownie points for our spirituality. Again, from Richard Rohr. In our consumer culture, even religion and spirituality have very often become a matter of addition. earning points with God, attaining enlightenment, producing moral behavior. Yet, he says, authentic spirituality is not about getting, attaining, achieving, performing, or succeeding. All these tend to pander to our egos. It is much more about letting go of what we don't need anyway, though we may not know that ahead of time. What we need is our connection with the divine. What we need is to be comfortable acknowledging and living with the divine that is all around us. This is much of what Jesus taught. When you take away the man-imposed interpretations, he taught love. He taught that God loves us, that we are of God, we can join God. And so given that is the context, now let me ask questions for your consideration, looking at the wheel of life, things to look at for yourself in your mini pilgrimages this week, if you're choosing to do that, or in your meditation time, however it is that you take your time for divine connection and leadership. A general question, and this came from the Orthodox Conference. Is my life being lived congruent to the tenets of my faith, or am I living incongruent? Do I seek to live in unity with God's commandments? Do I make decisions about my life, thinking about how the divine expects me to act as one of God? Do I work toward a common good for beings on both sides of reality? Now the wheel of life. Questions to ask and consider about your family life. Am I living in and supporting an atmosphere of equal love, of equal welcome and acceptance within my family unit, whether it be blood family or intentional family? And this can be a critical one. In so much of the work I do in Lift, I find myself working with people who were not regarded as equal or spiritually equal within their families. And the damage that does, to me, is a major sin for those who've done it, bearing in mind that sinning is missing God's mark. Am I a good example to my family, seeing and energizing the spark of God within my family and with those that my family and I have contact with? The Quakers showed leadership not necessarily by preaching to everyone, but by being good examples. Certainly Francis of Assisi was that. Dorothy Day was that. Mother Teresa was that. The Dalai Lama is that. About your financial life. Do the methods and actions by which I generate my income reflect my spiritual ethics, including responding appropriately and equitably to each being who deals with me in a work-related manner? Now, notice I said being here. I'm not just talking about those of us who are still living in a carnal form. I'm talking about all beings representing the divine, including this earth, including the animals, including the plants, including the spirits who reside amongst us, within us, around us, and wherever else the other side is. Next question, do I work to assure that the money I expend avoids supporting organizations which behave in ways toxic to creating and supporting an experience of equal regard to all. Sometimes this will require extra effort on your part to know, but it's important. Similarly, do I avoid funding organizations with allegedly spiritual messages, which in fact seek to establish that people with different beliefs are less valuable to the divine? It's so easy to fall into that trap of, I'm okay, they're not okay. I'm okay, you're not okay. Whether it's on earthly behaviors or on spiritual behaviors. How about your physical actions, the physical aspect of your life? By my physical actions, do I show respect for the piece of divine being that really, exists in each being and each part of our earth? Again, notice how expansive this is. Do my physical actions encourage others to raise their spiritual awakenedness by providing the experience of high regard by someone for their own spiritual being? There's an old Quaker story, I have no idea whether it's apocryphal, of a Quaker who was horse riding between villages in England. And this was a time when the roads between villages was pretty much a path. There was lawlessness and banditry everywhere. And partway between the two villages, a bandit jumped out, pointed his pistol, grabbed the man's reins, and demanded that he dismount. And then, pointing the pistol at the man, demanded that he hand over all his valuables. And then the bandit got on the horse, was preparing to ride away, and the Quaker quickly grabbed the reins and said, I give you my valuables because they are not as valuable as my love of Jesus. But I grab the reins at risk of my life because I'm concerned for your life and your spiritual well-being. And talk to the man about that of God within him and how important he was to God and the dangers to his well-being with God if he continued to follow the lawless path. The outcome, the story says, was the bandit sat there, listened, repented, returned the goods to the Quaker, gave the Quaker his gun, and walked off. Now that's quite a story. We do not have to do it that way, but we are always able, even if in nothing else than prayer and well wishes, to, as the Quakers say, hold someone up in the light, the purifying, the loving light. Do my actions show that I always seek to build my own habit of equal response to all of God's being? In other words, are you setting a good example by your physical actions? Just as when a traveler would come to a village in England, he would ask where the Quaker merchant was, because the traveler knew whatever he needed to buy, he would be charged a fair price. The Quakers did not advertise the fact, but by their very actions, they became known as an honorable and honest people who treated each person with a specialness and the equality that they, being a part of God, deserved. How about interpersonal relationships? Do I set a good model of how to be welcoming and accepting to the spark of God in strangers? Sort of the idea of hail fellow, well met. Do I accept and respect the spark of God in each person I know, regardless of how buried it may be? And in my life, trust me, there are some people that's way buried, and I have a heck of a time remembering that there is that spark that I should be respecting and praying for, no matter how covered up in their earthly misdeeds, their earthly turmoil. By my own example, do I encourage my friends, colleagues, and acquaintances to be a force for lifting their world to a higher spiritual frequency? And here I talk frequency, it could be a higher spiritual plane, but I tend to think in terms of the calibration that David Hawkins uses of 0 to 1,000. And our goal, all of us, is to get as close to 1,000 to pure Godhead as we can in this walk. Do I have the courage to hold up others up to the light and to speak truth to power while still respecting and honoring the internal spirit and light of others? How about in terms of your spiritual walk? In what ways do I support others in their own spiritual seeking? Do I actively seek to build my own spiritual equanimity so that I am my own spiritual rock while dealing with other beings of the divine? Have I the spiritual and personal courage to stand unswayed from my spiritual truth, my spiritual walk, whether others around me may believe or feel otherwise? Do I remain tender to messages and guidance from the spirit world, which can help me build and maintain my personal and spiritual walk in equality, in equalness with others? How about your career? At my work, do I communicate honor, respect, and fair treatment to fellow workers and those we serve and encounter? Do my work actions support a sense of equal value and personal regard among those with whom I work? The emotional part of our wheel of life. Am I able to maintain an attitude of spiritual caring, even for people who are emotionally difficult to deal with? Oh boy, I'm not super good at that one. But of course, our whole job here on this earth is to do better. Can I rely on my walk in spiritual equanimity to anchor my emotional stability in times of stress? The winds of change, the winds of stress sometimes blow suddenly, blow harshly. But if we can stay anchored in the stability of God within and of God around, then we can also respond to all pieces of the upset, recognizing that they too have the divine as part of them, whether we're talking this planet or people of this planet. How about leadership? Because all of us are leaders, whether you think so or not. Our very actions, our very words every day, witnessed by others. We are leading. Do I lead and encourage others to understand the importance of interacting with others with acknowledgement of their equality and their spiritual equalness? Do I encourage others to build their own sense of living amongst both worldly equals and spiritual equals? Do I seek to instill an understanding of the importance of conducting only honorable transactions, since we all are equal in the eyes of God? Quite a list to consider for this week. A closing thought from Unity. I rise on wings of prayer to fulfill my divine potential. There may be times when it is hard to believe that all people are equal. Outwardly, people differ in every conceivable way, but underneath apparent inequalities, beneath the differences brought about by environment and other factors, lies the divine potential that is the same in all people. We all have God's Spirit in us. All of us are not expressing it to the same degree. Some are allowing it to blossom forth. Others are neglecting it or have neglected. Others know nothing about its existence. And thus what we see appears to be inequalities. The same Spirit that was in Jesus Christ. And here I'll add the cosmic Jesus Christ that Richard Rohr speaks of, is in all of us. So let me say that again. The same Spirit that is in the cosmic Jesus Christ is in all of us. Knowledge of this truth frees us from a sense of competition, and peace and satisfaction are established.